because actually for us, the really key thing is making sure that that local delivery can happen and that we can deliver to the customer first time. So what does this mean from an automation perspective? Well, it means that as we gain a subscription customer in, should we say, a new postcode, I believe the term is postcode district, but anyway, like a kind of a subset of your kind of bigger postcode. As we get a new customer in that area, the automation kicks in and we automatically start showing more ads to people in that particular area, because we know now that that's actually going to be a cheap customer to deliver to, shall we say. So that's kind of one example of how we're having to take quite a holistic view of this. And I suppose also this is where it starts to become really important to make sure you've got really great objectives and goals and North Star metrics, because when it comes to combining marketing automation and operational automation, you need to make sure that everything is actually feeding into the same overall goal.
Here we are again at another CheckoutScout tent, and I'm joined today by Tom Szekeres, who runs and set up the hyper-local e-commerce store Subship, and he's also a big user of Shopify in his work, and indeed a trainer on that. So we've got a few questions for him today. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you. Well, we're just going to go through some very quick questions and answers about you and what you do currently. So just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and what Subship does.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a digital marketer by background. I started out doing SEO, then I went and worked in the government for a little bit. And then I got quite heavily into social media sort of over the past 10 years. And I founded my own social media agency back in 2013. And almost immediately, there seemed to be this kind of huge rise of this platform that I'd heard about bubbling in the background before, but this platform called Shopify, which just started to I guess, gain quite a bit of traction maybe around 2013. And very interestingly, integrated incredibly well with all these new social media tools that we were starting to see. So little by little, I started to learn more and more about Shopify. I started to get more, particularly startup clients who were using the platform. And before long, I started finding myself becoming much more interested in e-commerce than I had been perhaps about social. So when I sold my agency, the sort of natural next step was then to think about, well, what do I want to do next? And I hit upon the idea of an ethical subscription service. Then the pandemic happened. And so in the end, I thought, well, do you know what? There's maybe something I could do here. I set up a hyperlocal listing service. It was very popular. I learned a lot from doing that. And ultimately, the insights from that went into creating Subship. And the natural place to get it launched was on Shopify.
Great. And you specialize in around South London, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually we're making quite heavy use of the local delivery feature in Shopify. We actually don't offer, if you like, delivery outside of South London. We're very much focused on roughly now about 20 postcodes, and we do all of our own deliveries. So actually a really important thing for us is, I suppose, doing that kind of last mile delivery in an ethical way, as well as selling a wide range of incredible local products. What
are the challenges in your business that you see, perhaps both in terms of marketing automation, which is one area that interests us, but you also mentioned delivery, so more on the sort of operational side, but perhaps starting with marketing first, then turning to operations. What are the challenges you've got to undertake at the moment?
I suppose as a pre-seed company, as a very, very early stage company, my time is quite valuable to me. I'm also the dad of 2 young kids. So automation is the absolute crux of what we're doing. And in particular, making sure that automation is happening both on the marketing side and on the operational side, it's essential. Without automation, my company wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today. I'd actually previously run quite a few experiments with previous clients, and the earliest hit, I suppose, was actually setting up a really powerful email automation funnel and actually using drip campaigns featuring products from the product catalog. That was actually a sort of really interesting thing to get started with. The challenge, I suppose, comes from, first of all, I guess, making sure that all of our products are automation ready, that actually no matter where the product gets surfaced, no matter which channel, whether it is within Facebook via dynamic product ads, or whether it is via MailChimp with some of our drip campaigns, it's really important actually to make sure that contextually the copy that you write works in all of these different situations. I guess the other challenge with marketing automation is to make sure that you're not bombarding the same user here, there, and everywhere, actually making sure that retargeting is happening intelligently, and you're perhaps excluding, for example, your email audience from that retargeting because they're hearing from you anyway every week.
What do you see as some of the solutions that you've got to put into place?
So for us, the really crucial thing is, first of all, to make sure that we have a really nice density of customers within our geographic area. Because actually for us, the really key thing is making sure that that local delivery can happen and that we can deliver to the customer first time. So what does this mean from an automation perspective? Well, it means that as we gain a subscription customer in, should we say, a new postcode, I believe the term is postcode district, but anyway, like a kind of a subset of your kind of bigger postcode. As we get a new customer in that area, the automation kicks in and we automatically start showing more ads to people in that particular area, because we know now that that's actually going to be a cheap customer to deliver to, shall we say. So that's kind of one example of how we're having to take quite a holistic view of this. And I suppose also this is where it starts to become really important to make sure you've got really great objectives and goals and North Star metrics, because when it comes to combining marketing automation and operational automation, you need to make sure that everything is actually feeding into the same overall goal, and that actually you're not kind of disrupting the system by being overly automated over here, and then causing a problem operationally over on this side.
What specific sort of providers, vendors, software tools are you seeing and using? And we'll maybe talk about Shopify in a minute, obviously, as a very big one, but some of the more emerging kind of tools and solutions, what do you rely on in your business at Subship?
So there's some really interesting, I suppose you could kind of say, financial modeling tools that I think are really interesting. One that has only emerged over the last couple of months is one that is called Retention X. So what Retention X does is, I suppose, it somewhat commoditizes data science for Shopify shop owners. So what do I mean by that? Well, I can't afford at the moment to hire a data analyst or a data scientist. So Retention X very, very neatly calculates things like customer lifetime value, calculates things like customer acquisition cost, but also all of these other metrics like retention rate, customer churn, and does so in a really kind of nice, neat interface. So that's a really interesting one that I'm quite excited about. There's also, I suppose, the wider, what you might call no-code or low-code trend. So we're very, very keen on using Airtable as a kind of back-end database, and actually that allows us to do a lot of stuff that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And then we kind of integrate that initially with Zapier. And then once we have a particular workflow or a kind of Zap set up and running really nicely, and we have it exactly as we want it, then we can pass it along to a developer, and they can then actually create a proper solution. So I guess, yeah, there's some kind of interesting trends there. There's no code. There's actually the ability to integrate these different tools using a tool like Zapier. And I suppose in part that then gets you away from getting sucked into relying on too many inbuilt Shopify apps, because something that has, I suppose, happened over the last couple of years is the app ecosystem. While it's great, you have started to see a situation where you start installing too many apps and it can cause you problems, particularly with site speed sluggishness. And so actually, annoyingly, that one of the issues that Shopify itself is going to have to deal with is how do you avoid becoming something like WordPress plus WooCommerce, where actually you start to get loads of problems once you have too many, I suppose, too many plugins or too many add-ons or too many apps added to your store.
So you see that now as a bit of an area of issue for them, in that there's so many plugins that you can end up with a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of a site if you pull in everything.
Yeah, and you're seeing them respond to this, for example, with subscriptions. What they are doing these days could actually be compared quite similarly to Twitter's old strategy, whereby Twitter would allow the app ecosystem to create these incredible new features or, whatever else. And then Twitter would say, okay, well, now we can see that actually search is going to be important. So we're going to buy the best search engine and we're going to integrate that. Shopify's strategy is a little bit different, but what they've done is they've seen the rise in popularity of subscription e-commerce. They've seen apps like Bold subscriptions and Recharge do very well, but where the customer experience leaves a lot to be desired. So now in January, they've released the subscriptions API, which means now that if you go to the subscription store and you buy an app from one of those providers, it's not using a third-party payment gateway like Stripe. It's not using their own kind of, frankly, shonky interfaces. It's actually using native subscriptions functionality from Shopify themselves. So I think this is what we're going to see increasingly, which may actually ruffle a few feathers with the developer community.
And finally, on Shopify, perhaps for an e-commerce store or merchant like yourselves, is it something that you see you can stick with for the foreseeable future? Because obviously, replatforming is a topic for some players at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose the interesting player that has come on the scene in the last 6 months or so is almost like a Shopify clone, which is Swell. And it's interesting because Swell has focused very heavily on, I suppose, recreating Shopify, but where everything is completely native, and also where you're essentially building a platform as you would today. Because Shopify, the first version of Shopify was built in 2004. Actually, what Swell does is it uses, I suppose, quite kind of bleeding edge technology, and it also uses what's called headless e-commerce to actually work with, I suppose, how you would recreate Shopify if you were building it today. What this means is that a platform like Swell looks on the back end very much like Shopify and is very, very familiar, but on the front end is much, much faster. And in a world where Google is increasingly giving priority to websites that are speedy and perform really well, this is an area that Shopify sort of really needs to address.
Well, as we come towards the end of our little chat, one question is to name a possible sort of breakout star in e-commerce for 2021. You've mentioned Swell there as one to watch. Any other names of things that are kind of coming up on the rails that people in e-commerce should be aware of for 2021?
Yeah, I suppose more broadly, I'm really excited to see some of the newer subscription apps that have now been enabled by this new subscriptions API. So I haven't had a chance yet to try out all of them, but I know that for quite a few months now, there've been lots of developers looking to build brand new apps, brand new experiences that actually make subscriptions much more user friendly and much more customizable as well by merchants. Because actually, I guess subscriptions so far just haven't really worked as well as they could when you're doing more than one product.
Just on that, is just as perhaps an aside, but is subscriptions a real driver for a lot of people in your position? I suppose if you can get a customer to subscribe fortnightly, monthly, or weekly, or whatever it might be, is there a factor of how much value that brings over above just signing them up as a one-off customer?
Yeah, so the thing that you have to look at beyond simply the fact that you now have predictable recurring revenue, the other thing is for us doing local delivery, because we know that we have one customer here, 5 customers here, we know that we have customers in each of these different postcodes, and we know we're going to be delivering to them week in, week out. We have a much better grip of how much it's going to cost to deliver to a neighbor in a neighboring postcode. Whereas if you don't have subscriptions, actually you don't have that guarantee that you're going to be delivering to, I don't know, let's just say, for example, Clapham. You have no guarantee that you are going to be able to deliver to Clapham. So for a business like ours, it's incredibly important. I suppose the other thing to say as well about subscriptions is they have massively increased in popularity over the last year. In the UK, I think last year, 2 in 5 households used subscription e-commerce, which may not sound like much, but that's a doubling year over year. And if you look as well at the lifetime values for certain categories, for beverages, for example, you're talking about LTVs of $300, $400, which is, something very, very attractive.
Well, look, as we come to the end, a couple of more sort of lighter questions. And you've already started, of course, one business in e-commerce, but our sort of fun question here is if money and investment was no object and product and development was no object and you could start a different e-commerce business tomorrow, what would you start? What sector would you jump into?
Gosh, yeah. Well, I think, so I'm going to sort of, I suppose, talk a little bit about a problem that actually has faced our family. So it's a little bit of heaviness, but also with a bit of lightness. So I think that a really powerful thing would actually be to democratize fertility treatment. So I've always had this idea that actually it would be fantastic if we could use e-commerce to drive fertility treatment, and that actually we would be able to have people first of all start on that journey with home testing kits, and then if they are suffering from that problem, then actually there are starting to emerge some really amazing technologies that allow families to access fertility treatment at a much lower price point. So it's actually not quite as fun an answer, but that's where I probably go.
It's a very important point. Yeah, so currently it's a kind of pre-commerce digital transformation environment, is it, with sort of basically manual human-to-human applications and processes? It's not like in any way a marketplace or a self-serve
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you go through fertility treatment, obviously, if you end up where we ended up, then eventually you're going to need potentially to have an IVF clinic. But actually, before you get to that point, there's plenty of opportunity to actually use e-commerce to democratize some of this treatment, because quite frankly, it's incredibly expensive, and in many parts of the world, it just doesn't really exist right now.
Right. No, thank you for that very, very sort of thought-provoking point. Finally, when lockdown in the UK is lifted and retail and bricks and mortar premises are open again, what's the first place you're going to head to, and what's the first thing you're going to buy?
Oh God, this is just going to be such a cliched answer, but it's definitely going to be to the pub to buy a pint. And then in terms of, I guess, more traditional retail, probably the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a bakery down the road. Actually, this again it's all about food and drink for me. So yeah, I'm going to go to a bakery down the road, and I'm going to have one of their ridiculous cronutty type things, and it's going to be glorious. I'm going to have it with a flat white, because I haven't had a flat white in God knows how long.
Right. That's great. Good answer. Tom Szekeres, thanks very much for spending a bit of time with us on the Checkout Scout tent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you.